So, recently I was asked to give a talk for a community in Japan using some of the words of Bruce Lee. And I was really delighted because, of course, I'm of the age where I always loved Bruce Lee movies. Yeah, they were kind of violent, but the good guys pretty much always won. But also, he was a kind of, in a certain way, a secular, popular bodhisattva. He had a certain kind of wild wisdom. And somewhere he wrote, he said, "Be like water, making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves." Kind of sounds like the Genjo koan. I'm going to read it again. Be like water, making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you will find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves.
Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm Jeff.
Before we begin, a little context about the voice you're about to hear.
Came of age during the Civil Rights Movement.
In the 1960s, she was active in anti-war protests.
Joan Halifax, working alongside cultural historian Ellen Lomax, studying how culture, power, and voice shape human lives.
That early engagement with injustice never left her.
It eventually found expression through Buddhist practice.
And through a life dedicated to meeting suffering directly, rather than turning away.
That path brought her into close relationship with Bernie Glassman.
Together, they helped shape a form of practice rooted not in answers,
but in presence,
in staying with what we don't know,
in bearing witness to suffering just as it is,
and in allowing action to arise from that ground.
Not as ideology, not as strategy,
but as responsibility.
Joan Halifax has lived this practice alongside Bernie.
From civil rights work to caregiving to bearing witness in places like Auschwitz.
So, when she speaks about moral distress,
about not knowing,
about care and response,
she's speaking from a life shaped by these movements again and again.
What you're about to hear is not a framework.
It's a life speaking.
So, here's Roshi Joan Halifax.
Thank you so much for showing up to everything that is happening in our world today. And I think that many of us have this sensibility of just profound moral distress. And I think Bernie captured something that he manifested, particularly in my experience of him in Auschwitz, in the bearing witness retreats that I was able to attend. I remember how Bernie would sit in the midst of raw complexity, of tears, of anger, of anguish, of outrage, and bear witness to it all. And this is what I turn to. How do we cultivate not a mind that seeks a strategy or an explanation for things? Bernie talked about the value of the process of not knowing, which is not being stupid or ignorant, but of dropping to a place where you can really bear witness to the truth of suffering in an unbiased way. And from not knowing and bearing witness, then the possibility of compassionate action can arise. A very strong assignment for all of us. Indeed. Unless we take full responsibility, touch the truth of suffering, not turn away from it, just as Bernie taught so deeply in the course of his life, and then look for actions that are not necessarily logical, but kind of what our good friend Norman Fisher has spoken about in terms of the bodhisattva attitude and having a radical imagination that allows us to see things in a very different way. That the separation between outward and inward is a construct. And what Lee, I think, was talking about very much in the chord of what Bernie was talking about was this incredible power of being nimble, of being fluid like water, of being permeable, adaptable, responsive, emergent, being able to be in the present moment, moment by moment, and being awake, being vital, and being responsive in a way that is congruent and spontaneous with whatever is present in a moment. Compassion is not prescribed. It's not prescriptive. It is responsive to the moment as it is. And this is what the Buddha called an appropriate response. It's not a prescribed response. It's not an algorithm per se. It's how we are bearing witness, living non-separately from our world, completely immersed in the moment as it is and responding in a non-dual, in a non-separate ways. And just as water unifies, so also I think that a heart-mind that is non-rigid, but one that is radically inclusive, like water is inclusive. Now, the word inclusive is very interesting to me because one of the very valued processes that is really at the heart of Buddhist practice has to do with the cultivation of equanimity. And really, from the Mahayana perspective, it's about being responsive. And my interest in this word equanimity was really piqued around a definition that Thich Nhat Hanh gave to equanimity. And it's very close to what Bernie was speaking about in terms of bearing witness. His definition of equanimity is in the word inclusivity. Inclusivity. Really not separating from things as they are. It's a very brilliant take, I feel, on what it means to actualize not knowing and bearing witness, or radical equanimity or inclusivity. You know, one of the things that really moved me about Bernie's later years after his stroke, he was so smart and he was an incredible strategist. But after his stroke, I remember sitting with him and Eve in their little house. And he said, the stroke has made me more emotional. It's as though the stroke had somehow disarmed him from the convention of structural thinking into direct feeling. And this gave his life a flavor in his final years. And I, as an older person, am also feeling it as well. It is not to turn away from that suffering, which is not separate from the suffering of others, including the suffering of the perpetrators. It's very difficult for us to identify the suffering of perpetrators, that those who cause harm to others, that state of mind is also suffering. And I think this is something that Bernie saw so clearly, and how he could sit with equanimity and inclusivity in these conditions of extremity that he invited us to be part of, to not turn away from the charnel grounds of those whom we identify with in the waves of suffering, but also those we don't identify with, like political leaders, or like the prison guard who's beating a prisoner, or the policeman, the knee on the neck of George Floyd. That too is suffering. Not the kind that we want to necessarily feel compassion toward. And I think it's important to feel compassion toward all. Compassion is not sappy. It is characterized by radical inclusivity. Another Buddhist term here, which I've been really turning to, is Appamāda. And that term really, it's usually translated as vigilance or heedfulness or even conscientiousness. But I make the point that Stephen Batchelor translates it as care. And I really love that perspective. And one of the images that is evoked around the term Appamāda is like the elephant's footprint. That all other states and processes, whether it's the Brahma Viharas or it's the factors of awakening and etc., all are like smaller animals that can fit within the elephant's footprint of this embracing, inclusive Appamāda of conscientiousness and care. And of course, one of the ways that we actualize Appamāda, and we actualize or conscientiousness and care, and we actualize an appropriate response is through community, through our relationships with each other, which are characterized by conscientiousness and by transparency, by the guts to really disclose who we are in any given moment. And I think this is one of the reasons why the third treasure in Buddhism is the Sangha, and why Thai said so clearly that the coming Buddha is the Sangha. The future Buddha is the Sangha. It's each other, how we work in community. So I want to share a story because I think stories are cool. And it's about a woman called Josephine Mandamin, Anishinaabe grandmother who was born in 1942. Josephine was a survivor of the Canadian Indian residential school system. She was also a founder of the Water Protectors movement in North America. And during her 77 years, she walked about 25,000 miles around the shorelines of all the Great Lakes and other waterways in North America. And she carried a single bucket of water to bring awareness to the need to protect the waters of our earth from pollution, and particularly to the immense lakes that were sacred to her people. What really got me about this story is that it was just one old woman who began this, humbly carrying a single bucket of water, not looking to make headlines, not even thinking about starting a movement. So often we feel we have to create an institution, do marketing, make a whole thing of everything. But the importance of every action that we're engaged in at whatever level, whatever scale that we operate at, that we offer our lives to, the scale doesn't make any difference. What makes a difference from my point of view is showing up. Showing up. So Josephine did not really resource the inspiration for her actions until the year 2000, when she was at a Sundance ceremony in Pipestone, Minnesota. And the Grand Chief, Eddie Benton Bernays, told her and others that he had a dream. And in that dream, water would cost as much as gold by the year 2030. He turned to people in the ceremony and he said, "What are you going to do about it?" Her people really understand, the Great Lakes peoples, really understand the power of water. And she began to speak with her sisters, the elders and the young women. And as a grandmother of her people, she was culturally and socially in a significant role because women of her age are held in deep respect by her people. Also, from the Ojibwe worldview, water is seen as a living being. And as a woman and as an elder, her role was seen as a life giver and also a water keeper. I mean, she recognized that she had a sacred obligation to pass on her water knowledge so that future generations could survive. So she began to water walk. Her first walk around Lake Superior was in 2003. Her act influenced directly and indirectly Indigenous peoples all over the world. Elsewhere, Bruce Lee wrote, he said, the oneness of all life is a truth that can be fully realized only when false notions of a separate self, whose destiny can be considered apart from the whole, are forever annihilated. It's pretty amazing. These are our words that go straight to the heart of our view, of our practice. The oneness of life is a truth that can be fully realized only when false notions of a separate self, whose destiny can be considered apart from the whole, are forever annihilated. So the call, in a certain way, is to be like water. The selflessness of water, the ability of water to take any shape and appropriate response, able to meet any situation in its terms. This is what a bodhisattva is, the realization of this paramita of generosity, dana paramita, this act of giving life to life, as Dogen says, always considering others before you act. Understanding cause and effect, understanding personal responsibility, understanding coming from love and not separateness, seeing the sacredness of all of life, embodying a response that is authentic, I think is really critical that we develop that capacity in ourselves, but also through each other. This vision of one woman carrying a bucket of water and walking with her sisters, old and young, seeing that they were not separate from the waters. We are not separate from the very atmosphere that we breathe. We are not separate from the forests that produce the very oxygen that gives us life, or the ecological diversity that we take for granted, so many of us. So often we don't recognize. What is your bucket? What's going into your bucket? I don't care how humble an act it is. Take it, move it. That is what Appamāda brings into focus, really understanding that our vows are actualized in the details of our life, in the actual details of our everyday existence. Using the privilege of having been born at this time, the miracle of being born at this time of incredible challenge, where we are at an inflection point, and using this as a moment to give life to life.
As this talk comes to a close, I keep thinking about lineage.
Not lineage as something you inherit,
but rather lineage as something that you live.
Joan's reflections echo a practice she shared for years with Bernie Glassman.
Staying with what we don't know.
Refusing to turn away from suffering.
Letting response arise from that ground.
Not polished, not easy.
It asks something of us right where we live.
If you're wondering how that might take shape in your community,
you can explore the Taking Action Initiative at www.zenpeacemakers.org.
Thank you for listening.
And also for staying with what's difficult.
Please subscribe to the Peacemakers Podcast and support this work through membership or donation.
We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Until then, may care guide what comes next.
The Peacemakers Podcast is a production of Zen Peacemakers, an international organization whose mission is to realize our oneness and relieve suffering through contemplative social action. You can find the full video recording of this podcast and more at www.zenpeacemakers.org and go to our media library.